I can see myself right here. This is really odd. I guess I'm there too. The first thing I'm sure you're all thinking is, I don't remember Jim McLean being that tall. But as a reminder, Jim McLean has sent his regrets. He's a little bit under the weather, so I am Tom Shine, again from KMUW, stepping in for Jim, who was very excited that we be represented here with this great group, but just he could not make it. After those two really uplifting presentations, I'm here to try to bring a little bit of hope to the conversation. We're going to talk about as traditional media continues to shrink and struggle, especially in newspapers, and I would know that because I got laid off a year ago, so I know exactly what that's like, and the Eagle laid off 3 of my very good friends this last week as well. There are other news sources available, and surprisingly, I work for one of them, and we'll talk about that a little bit, and some other options as well. But let me first say that it is true that there are certainly less newspaper reporters working. I think the Eagle newsroom is down to 23 people, which is almost incomprehensible to me, because when I started there in 1980, I think we had 23 people in the sports department, which is probably too many, but we had a whole bunch of them anyway. But there are still a lot of really good people doing good journalism around the state, especially covering politics and the State House. There's just fewer of them. I would specifically note that among others, Jonathan Shorman and Diane Leffler of the Wichita Eagle are very good. Diane is a longtime person. Jonathan, the Eagle, hired away from the Topeka Capital Journal. He was their State House reporter. Both are very good. Tim Carpenter of the Topeka Capital Journal is a really, really good reporter, terrific reporter. I know the Eagle tried to hire him at least twice, but he loves Topeka and loves being near the State House. We couldn't get him down. And I also would mention Brian Lowry, who recently left the Star to go to Washington, D.C., worked for the Eagle. The Eagle was his first newspaper job, which is almost hard to believe because he's so good already. And then went to work for the Star, and now is going to the McClatchy Bureau in D.C., and will cover national politics for the Star. So there are good people still working in the state. There's just not as many of them, and as Jason pointed out. I told my daughter, I apologize, I said, I am speaking with Jeff Jarman from WSU and Jeff Probst, and she was not interested at all. I said, the Survivor guy? And I said, no, I don't think it's him. He's from Hutch, but it's Jason Probst, sorry. But as he pointed out, there are good people working across the state. There's just fewer of them, and the burdens on them are higher, and the ability to take a week off to report a story, that's pretty hard to do anymore at any newspaper, in Kansas anyway. But there are people out there working. I should also mention there's a couple of very good subscription services that cover the State House. One of them is Sunflower State Journal that's run by Brad Cooper. Brad covered the State House for the Kansas City Star. He covered the Brownback administration, which is always an interesting day when he covered the Brownback administration. He has a subscription service that's very good. And then, of course, the Hawver's Capital Report, which has been around over 20 years now. Vicki Griffith Hawver and Dennis Hawver run that. They're both former print reporters for the Topeka Capital Journal, and also have a lot of insight into the State House. So there are other options as well, rather than traditional newspapers and traditional TV. One of them that I want to talk about, because if I don't, Jim will find out and I'll be in trouble, is the Kansas News Service, which, if you've not heard it, is a regional collaboration of reporters and editors at 4 public radio stations in Kansas. And those include KMUW in Wichita, where I work, High Plains Public Radio in Garden City, Kansas Public Radio in Lawrence, and KCUR in Kansas City. The news service has 7 reporters and 2 editors assigned to it full-time, and that alone makes us one of the larger media organizations in the state, which is, I guess we should be proud of that, but in a way I'm not that proud of it, but I guess it means everybody else is pretty small. But we have a pretty large number of people who work for us. Many of them are former print people like me who have moved to radio. I would say that I know this to be a fact that in the 2018 legislative session in Topeka, we had more people covering the State House than any other media organization in the state, period. We had more people there than anybody. Star, the Eagle, Harris News Service, boy, I'm dating myself there, aren't I? Gatehouse News Service or anybody else. We had more people there than anybody because we think it's important, and we think people are interested in that, and we think that one of the fundamental responsibilities of good media is watchdog coverage, and that's what we try to provide to a degree. We also have the ability, besides those 9 people who work for the news service, and we also have the ability to draw from KMUW and KCUR staff as well. Also from Harvest Media, which is also another regional collaboration run out of KCUR, covers mostly ag stuff. When you hear a story about swine disease in China, that's probably from Harvest Media on NPR. But for instance, this last week, Nadia Foe, who works for KMUW and was one of my reporters, she went to Pratt to cover the James Thompson, Ron Estes forum, which, by the way, Jeff, you'll be surprised to hear that Ron Estes said he won, by the way. I didn't know they were keeping score, but apparently they were. Nadia went to that Thursday afternoon or Thursday night in Pratt, filed a story for morning newscasts, also wrote a digital story that was shared out to all the station members in the Kansas News Service. So all the Kansas News Service members were able to use that material, and their listeners and readers could use it as well based on the collaboration that we have with the news service. So that's what we're trying to do, work more efficiently, more smartly, and to cover the news. National Public Radio, which we obviously are part of, is promoting collaborative journalism across the country. They're trying to connect reporters at different stations to each other so they can do more work, as I said, efficiently and more effectively. It is a model that NPR is trying to institute nationally. They're in the beginning stages of that right now. They're having a lot of meetings about it. And they are specifically watching the Kansas News Service because that's what they want everybody else to model. We are a model for the country in what we're doing. And I'm not saying, thank you. And I'm not saying we get it right every day, because we don't, because I'm there and I know we don't get it right every day. But we get it right a lot of days. And the model we're trying to do is a model that NPR is trying to do across the country to extend those resources, as scarce as they might be, so that instead of just Nadia Foe going to Pratt, Kansas City's not going to Pratt, and Garden City's not going to Pratt, we just have one person going to Pratt and then sharing that out. That's the idea behind that. And it's something that we think we'll see more around the country in the coming years. Here's our mission statement from the Kansas News Service. The Kansas News Service produces essential enterprise reporting and diving deep, connecting the dots, and tracking policies, issues, and events that affect the health of Kansans and their communities. And when we talk about health, which is one of our hallmarks, we're talking about capital H health, economy, jobs, education, all those things that affect health. And we're not talking about health care, although we do cover health care. We're talking about the big letter H, health, is what we're trying to get at. And obviously politics, in Topeka, Medicaid, CanCare, all those things like that, those are all health issues as well. So we're trying to cover that. So as part of the Kansas News Service mission to share good journalism, not only do we share among our NPR partners in the state, but all of the stories and photos that we produce can be used by any news organization in the state for free. We don't charge them for it. They can grab it off our website. They can use our photos. They can use our video. We don't take a lot of video, but we're working on that. They can use our video. It's available to everybody. We've made contact with the Gatehouse people. I know Ron Sfuster a little bit from back in the day, to try to get them to encourage them. As Jason said, as staffs reduce, they're looking for content, local content. National content is easy, you just pay for that, you can get national content. So we're trying to share our information with other newspapers. So you probably have seen Kansas News Service stories in your local paper, or certainly seen it on their website. It's also been shared by commercial radio in addition to public radio in Kansas and in other states. Our favorite so far is that a French website in Morocco picked up one of our stories. I don't know why exactly they picked up Brian Grimmett's story about proposed changes by the Trump administration in coal emissions, which apparently is big news in Morocco. So they used it, so you never know. The nice thing about our state collaboration is that it allows us to produce weightier and deeper daily newscasts, which I'm very interested in since I have to produce those every day, but also allows time, which is a huge commodity in journalism these days, time to attack deeper projects as well. A few examples of those that we're working on right now: Stephen Basaha, who works in KMUW, and Celia Yopez Jepson, formerly of the Topeka Capital Journal, now of the Kansas News Service, who both cover education, are working on a project together about the migration of young college students from out of Kansas and the problems that is causing, and what that means for the Kansas and our future. And as the father of 2 migrants who I will never get back here, I don't think, it concerns me greatly because I've got one more. I got a shot at one more. I'm trying to keep her here. That work is supported by a grant from the Education Writers Association, and we do a lot of grant work at the Kansas News Service and at KMUW, which allows us to do stories like that. The Kansas News Service is producing a podcast called My Fellow Kansans, which I hope you've heard about. If you haven't, if you go to KMUW.org, you can listen to a trailer for it. It's going to explore the state's political history, especially our recent hard turn to the right, in the context of this November's election. That's going to start on September 17th, which I believe is a week from Monday, and Jim McLean will be your host on that, but also would include Kansas News Service people, Stephen Caranda, among them on that podcast as well. The Kansas News Service, KMUW, and KWCH Channel 12 are working together to produce a governor's forum this October. That'll be broadcast statewide. The tentative is October 9th, but that'll be in the Channel 12 studios, but we'll be part of that, and then share that to our member stations across the state as well. KMUW is working on a project with the Wichita Eagle right now to examine student discipline, specifically expulsions, both in Wichita and across the state, and to see what the numbers tell us these days about expulsions and discipline in schools. And then KMUW is in preliminary talks, very preliminary, I might say, with 1A, which is a national NPR show out of Washington. I think it's pretty popular, that we run in the mornings on KMUW, about collaborating on a project heading into the 2020 election, which will include some town hall type meetings here in Wichita. So all of those are things that we're able to do because of the Kansas News Service. In addition to the daily news that we do, I will tell you that at KMUW, because of the daily news that we get from the news service, we are adding 4 more newscasts later this month. So we'll be doing newscasts additional newscasts at 10, noon, and 3, which is keeping me up at night a little bit, trying to make sure we can fill all those. But we think that there's a need for it. We think there's a need for more local reporting, so we're going to try to do that. The Kansas News Service is helping us do that, so that's a great thing. One more nugget about the Kansas News Service at KMUW. According to a recent survey by the Pew Research Center, the audience for nearly every major sector of the U.S. news media fell in 2017, with one exception. Who's the exception? Who said NPR? You get a prize. Radio was the only media that didn't lose listenership or content readership in 2017. So newspapers and cable news were down by double digits. Local TV was down about 7%. NPR listeners was steady. We didn't gain, but we didn't lose. So I guess in these days that's a win. About 30 million people a week listen to NPR, which is that's a pretty good number of people, because in that 30 million, you're also getting local news inside your national programming as well. So we think that's pretty good. So I guess I'll sum this up so we can get to happy hour here sooner rather than later. That yes, these are difficult times for traditional media. I know that personally. I also have a son who's a newspaper reporter in Dallas. He's the 3rd generation of my family to work in newspapers. My father worked in them for 45 years. I worked in them for 37. My 2 brothers worked in them for about 60 years combined, and now my son's doing it. And I really hope he's able to retire from that business, but I'm concerned about it. The good news I have, though, is that a recent Pointer survey showed that more than 70% of Americans across all political spectrums, left and right and middle, have a great deal or a fair amount of trust in their local newspapers and their local media. Not so much the national media, not so much the cable news, but local media they trust. And to me, that makes it even more important that we somehow support our local media, trying to find ways to bolster our local media. And I think if we do that, that's a building block for the future. Thank you very much.
All right, that's it. That's it. Woohoo!